Oral questions, question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians woke up this morning and were shocked to learn they have a new NDP Liberal government that is planning to spend and tax unlike anything we've seen before. Now things are starting to make sense. Now we understand why the NDP have been so eager to prop up the Liberals and their unethical behaviour. It's because they have been cooking up a secret backroom deal. My question to the leader of the new NDP Liberal Party is this. When did he start these secret talks with his new Deputy Prime Minister, the member for Burnaby South? Was it before, during, or just after the last election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
What this agreement means is in this time of uncertainty and pressures on Canadians, we're going to have predictability and an ability to focus on delivering the things that Canadians asked us all for collectively in the last election. More investments in housing, better support for families, help with the cost of living, growth for Canadians, the fight against climate change increased, and support on reconciliation. The toxicity and polarization that we'd seen in Parliament of the past is now an opportunity for us to deliver for Canadians, and that's what we shall do.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Suffering because of massive inflation, which is caused by the out-of-control spending of the old Liberal government. Now, Canadians are going to be living with a new NDP Liberal government, and the price tag has just skyrocketed. The NDP Liberal government's initial platform will cost over $200 billion, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. Can the NDP Liberal Prime Minister tell Canadians how much this backroom deal is going to cost them? How much?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we made a commitment in the last election to invest in housing, to invest in supporting for families, to invest in childcare, to grow the economy, to fight the pandemic, to move forward on fighting climate change. These are all things that we continue to be focused on. And Mr. Speaker, what we're going to see is an ability to work across party lines to reduce the toxic partisanship that we've seen in the past in this House and actually move forward on delivering concretely for Canadians. That's what Canadians want. That's what we're going to deliver.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Speaker, we've seen an attack from the left on Canada's oil and gas sector, our agricultural sector, and fisheries, all huge job creators. And now that extreme left-wing agenda has been baked into this secret backroom deal. The NDP Liberal platform will double down and intensify the attack on Canadian natural resources and jobs. So Canadians deserve to know how many more jobs are going to be lost, specifically in our natural resources, because of the NDP Liberal government and their backroom deal.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians saw what aggressive partisanship and toxicity in this place led to in terms of a slowed-down agenda delivering for Canadians. What we've been able to do in moving forward during this pandemic, seeing Canadians come together, is actually what we're going to be able to continue to do moving forward. Deliver on the things that we stood up for in the last election, deliver for Canadians and the things that they need to grow the economy, create good jobs for everyone, while fully continuing to respect Parliament.
Well, I'm taking a moment here, and just to remind folks that there's been a great listening of the questions, and I'm hoping there's going to be a good listening of the answers, so that we can make sure that we understand where everybody stands in this issue. But I'm hearing lots of shots coming over here, so I want to be sure that we actually hear the answers that the Prime Minister is trying to give us. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Speaker, make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, this backroom deal disrespects Parliament and it disrespects every single Canadian voter. Yeah. Right. Gas prices right now are shockingly high and they're going up, unfairly punishing Canadians and families. But today, Conservatives have proposed a reasonable and positive solution to save Canadians money at the gas pump. Conservatives are consistently conservative, and we always want to lower taxes for all Canadians. Will the NDP Liberal government tell this House if they support our motion, or will their first act as a coalition government be to continuing punishing Canadians with high taxes at the gas pumps?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The Leader of the official opposition needs to be careful when she's talking about supporting democracy, not spreading misinformation and disinformation at the same time. Mr. Speaker, Canadians returned this Parliament in a minority situation in the last election because they expected parties to work together collaboratively to deliver for Canadians. That is exactly what we're doing as we reach out across party lines to work together on the things where we agree, and there will be plenty of room for robust, informed debate in the areas we disagree. That's how Parliament should work, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to stand up for democracy.
L'honorable député de Mégantic-L'Érable.
Monsieur le Président, je ne sais pas trop à qui poser ma question aujourd'hui. Le nouveau gouvernement NPD libéral n'a pas eu de course à chefferie. Pourtant, il est clair que le nouveau programme du gouvernement est largement inspiré du dernier programme de la dernière campagne électorale du NPD. Plus de dépenses, plus de taxes, plus d'intrusion dans les champs de compétences provinciales et de moins en moins de respect pour le Parlement. Pour nous aider, est-ce que le premier ministre va faire une place à ses côtés au chef du NPD, le nommer officiellement vice-premier ministre, en remplacement de la ministre des Finances?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Président, cet accord est une opportunité de travailler ensemble de façon collaborative sur les enjeux où on est d'accord et de continuer à être en désaccord sur les enjeux sur lesquels on est en désaccord. Mais ça va permettre un fonctionnement de cette Chambre plus constructif qui va pouvoir livrer pour les Canadiens sur les priorités que nous partageons tous dans cette Chambre, que ce soit la croissance économique, de l'aide pour les vulnérables, la lutte contre les changements climatiques, plus de croissance économique. C'est les priorités des Canadiens et on va pouvoir travailler de façon constructive ensemble.
L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Maintenant que le NPD et les libéraux ont convolé en juste noces, peut-il amener les députés verts ici et tous les libéraux du bon bord, histoire de ne pas faire chambre à part? Je comprends que la base de l'entente, c'est de piétiner les juridictions du Québec et des provinces en matière de santé, d'assurance dentaire, d'assurance médicaments. Est-ce que c'est bien le fondement de cette entente qu'une fois pour toutes, ce gouvernement marié va marcher sur les juridictions du Québec?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Président, dans les dernières élections, on a eu ce débat justement et ce gouvernement et ce Parti libéral a toujours souligné que nous croyons profondément qu'il y a une responsabilité pour le gouvernement fédéral d'assurer que la qualité des soins de santé, la qualité des services offerts à travers le pays soit la meilleure possible pour tous les Canadiens. Et nous allons toujours travailler en collaboration et dans le respect avec les provinces, mais nous nous assurerons que tous les Canadiens à travers le pays reçoivent des soins de qualité. C'est ce à quoi les gens s'attendent.
L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Monsieur le Président, le NPD est résolument hostile à la loi québécoise sur la laïcité de l'État. Le Parti libéral est résolument hostile à la loi québécoise sur la laïcité de l'État. Un candidat à la direction du Parti conservateur même est devenu résolument hostile à la loi sur la laïcité de l'État. Est-ce que dans les fondements de cette alliance en juste noces, il y a aussi de s'en prendre une fois pour toutes avec les ressources de l'État canadien et l'argent de l'État canadien à la loi québécoise sur la laïcité?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, les Canadiens à travers le pays, y compris les Québécois, s'attendent à ce qu'un gouvernement fédéral soit toujours là pour défendre la Charte canadienne des droits et libertés, soit là pour défendre les droits fondamentaux de tous les Canadiens. Et nous allons toujours faire cela. Nous allons toujours être là pour s'assurer que les droits de tous et chacun soient respectés.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Made record profits as well as big box stores while families are struggling to put food on the table and fill up their tanks. We know that these companies have made record profits. We've got a chance to do something about that later on today when we can vote to tax our excess profits and reinvest that into people.
Order. Order. I know the temptations is there. I understand. Can we just keep it so we can actually hear the question that the member is asking? The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oil and gas companies and big box stores have made record profits while everyday families are struggling to buy their groceries and to fill up their tanks. We've got an opportunity to do something about that today when we vote on our Opposition Day motion, our plan to tax the excess profits of these corporations and reinvest that into helping people. We already know that the Conservatives are going to support the profits of big oil and gas. Where will the Prime Minister stand? With people and families or with the large corporations who've made excess profits?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, from the very beginning of our time in office in 2015, we've moved forward on lowering taxes for the middle class and raising them.
All right, this is the last time that I'm standing on this one. Because, quite honestly, I'm getting tired of standing on this one. Listen, let's try to keep a little decorum in the House. I know there's a lot of energy to be let out. I know we're still happy to be here after a few-week break, but it's good to be here, to talk to folks, to understand what's going on. And I believe the Honourable Prime Minister was trying to answer the question, or where were we? Because I kind of lost track. There you go. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when we got elected in 2015, it was on a commitment to lower taxes for the middle class and raise them on the wealthiest 1%. We did that, and then we moved forward with more supports for seniors, more supports for families. We've continued to look at ways of enabling economic growth and support for small businesses, while at the same time making sure that the tax system is fair. Mr. Speaker, these bells ringing are not ideal for me.
Listen, I'm going to stand here as long as it takes. You look great. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it over there. We don't need to be ringing bells. We don't need to be yelling and screaming. Let's just make sure we get through question period before 5 o'clock tonight. The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Les entreprises pétrolières et les magasins de grande surface ont fait des profits records en même temps que les familles ont de la misère à acheter l'épicerie et l'essence. On a une opportunité de régler ce problème aujourd'hui en taxant les profits excessifs des grandes entreprises et réinvestir l'argent pour aider les familles. Est-ce que le Premier ministre va protéger les intérêts de monsieur, madame, tout le monde ou les profits des grandes entreprises?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, depuis notre début au gouvernement en 2015, on s'est toujours concentré sur l'aide pour la classe moyenne. On a augmenté les impôts sur les mieux nantis pour pouvoir les réduire sur la classe moyenne. On a livré une allocation canadienne pour enfants qui a sorti des centaines de milliers d'enfants de la pauvreté. Et on continue avec nos investissements en garderie, on continue avec nos investissements sur les aînés. On va toujours être là pour appuyer les gens. On va toujours être là pour appuyer les Canadiens dans ces moments d'incertitude. Et l'entente que nous avons formulée va permettre à ce Parlement de mieux fonctionner avec moins de toxicité, comme malheureusement on continue de voir des conservateurs.
The honourable member for Abbotsford.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the new NDP Liberal coalition. In its last election platform, the NDP promised over $214 billion of spending, with no plan to ever balance the budget. Now, the NDP and the Liberals have secretly negotiated a deal to circumvent our democracy and go on a massive spending spree that future generations are going to have to pay back. How many billions has this Prime Minister bargained away in order to hang on to power, and how many of the NDP's spending promises will we see in the coalition's upcoming budget?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, it was in fact the Conservatives who had in their platform more spending than we did. But I think what's difficult watching some of the reactions on the other side, Mr. Speaker, is just how irresponsible the positions they're taking are. We actually saw the leader of the official opposition say that somehow us working with other parliamentarians constituted supporting Vladimir Putin. I think that the opposition really should reflect upon the way they're working in this place and focus on collaboration. We're willing to work with anybody to get the agenda of the government done.
L'honorable député de Louis-Saint-Laurent.
Comme vous le savez, le directeur parlementaire du budget a la responsabilité d'évaluer le coût des promesses électorales de chacun des partis. C'est ce qu'il a fait d'ailleurs l'automne dernier. Et il l'a fait pour le NPD. Alors, savez-vous combien le NPD s'est engagé à faire de nouvelles dépenses, Monsieur le Président? 214 milliards de dollars de nouvelles dépenses. Monsieur le Président, ma question s'adresse à l'actuel, je dis actuel parce qu'on ne sait jamais ce qui peut arriver, l'actuel ministre des Finances. Est-ce que la ministre néo-démocrate libérale des Finances du gouvernement canadien peut nous dire combien son gouvernement va dépenser en plus pour faire plaisir à ses nouveaux chums du NPD?
The Honourable Minister.
Je remercie mon honorable collègue pour sa question. Prenons un moment pour nous rappeler de ce que notre gestion financière signifie pour l'économie canadienne. Notre PIB a augmenté de 6,7 au-dessus des attentes du marché. Nous avons récupéré 112 des 3 millions d'emplois perdus pendant la pandémie. Le SCP et Moody's ont réaffirmé notre cote de crédit AAA. On avance pour les Canadiens, on adresse la abordabilité, on est ici pour avancer le pays.
L'honorable député de Louis-Saint-Laurent.
Monsieur le Président, comme on le sait, le NPD, c'est un parti centralisateur. En soi, c'est pas un défaut, mais on ne pense pas que nous autres, c'est une bonne chose d'être centralisateur dans le Canada. Par contre, le NPD l'est, donc le nouveau gouvernement NPD libéral va l'être. Donc, ça va faire des chicanes avec les provinces. On n'a vraiment pas besoin de ça. Monsieur le Président, ma question s'adresse aux députés ministériels, mais non ministres. Député de Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie, peux-tu nous dire quel programme qui relève du Québec va être empiété par le nouveau gouvernement NPD libéral?
L'honorable ministre.
Monsieur le Président, je comprends que mon honorable collègue a parlé du directeur parlementaire du budget dans sa question précédente. C'est intéressant de constater que ce même directeur parlementaire du budget a statué que le Parti conservateur, dans leur plateforme lors des dernières élections, allait dépenser plus d'argent que nous allons investir pour appuyer les Canadiens. Je sais, Monsieur le Président, que nos amis conservateurs sont frustrés, que la toxicité parlementaire est peut-être à sa fin, mais nous sommes ici pour livrer pour les Canadiens. C'est ça qu'on va faire au cours des prochaines années et nous avons bien hâte de collaborer avec toutes les parties de la Chambre des communes.
The honourable member for South Surrey, White Rock.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP has always wavered on its stance with defense treaties like NATO and NORAD, even going so far as publishing a white paper where they made it clear that they would pull Canada out of NATO at a time when Russia has attacked Ukraine. Our defense partnerships are now more important than ever. Does the new NDP Liberal government intend to uphold their promise to our allies, or will they pull out of NATO like the NDP so clearly wants to do?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. We are increasing our defense spending by 70% over the 9-year period beginning in 2017. We are very committed to our NATO and NORAD alliances, and we will continue to ensure that our Arctic is sovereign, that our continent is secure, and that we are ensuring upholding the rules-based international order. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Foothills.
The NDP Liberal government will continue to fail Canadian farmers. Lost markets, trade agreements, and they will continue to treat producers like a piggy bank with a farm-killing carbon tax that is devastating Canadian farmers. According to CFIB, Canadian farmers paid $14,000 a year in the first year of the carbon tax, $45,000 last year, devastating Canadian farmers. This is no joke. On April Fool's Day, the carbon tax goes up yet again, and the NDP wants that tax to be even higher. So here's the question. On April 1st, just how much more are Canadian farmers going to have to pay for this new carbon tax coalition?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je veux dire que nos fermiers à travers le pays sont très conscients de l'importance de s'attaquer au changement climatique. Ce qu'ils ont de plus important, c'est leurs terres. Ils sont les premiers à être frappés par les extrêmes climatiques, comme la sécheresse dans l'Ouest l'année passée et les inondations. Pour les aider, on a mis plusieurs programmes en place. Des programmes pour leur permettre d'adopter les bonnes pratiques, des cultures de couverture, les rotations de pâturage, de l'agriculture de précision aussi. On a des programmes aussi pour les aider à acquérir des nouvelles technologies propres. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, energy self-sufficiency is national security, but the Liberals have killed 4 pipelines, more than 300,000 oil and gas jobs, more than $150 billion in energy and Indigenous projects, and lost 18 LNG export proposals. Now, a scheme with the NDP to end oil and gas in Canada and hike the carbon tax. Canada has the most responsible oil and gas and among the largest reserves in the world, but still has to import. Does the Liberal-NDP cabal really want to keep Canada having to rely on oil and gas from corrupt regimes and hostile despots?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. We need to lower emissions in Canada's oil and gas sector, and we are investing in a range of non-emitting technologies that will get us to net zero. There is great opportunity right across our country from these investments, including in Alberta and in Saskatchewan. We've seen solar farms and a growing industry in renewables. This is a good opportunity going forward for our country.
L'honorable député de Jonquière.
Monsieur le Président, le gouvernement libéral vient de connaître sa vague orange. Et une fois de plus, les compétences du Québec et des provinces seront mises à mal. Logement, petite enfance, soins de longue durée, santé, assurance médicaments. C'est pas mêlant, on dirait le programme d'un parti provincial. Et vous aurez beau chercher, Monsieur le Président, dans l'entente, vous ne trouverez jamais les mots « droit de retrait avec pleine compensation ». Là, moi, je me demande quelque chose. Est-ce que le premier ministre a décidé, avec la bénédiction du NPD, de renforcer son pouvoir en piétinant ceux du Québec et des provinces?
L'honorable ministre.
Monsieur le Président, le Bloc québécois, il vit pour la chicane. Il vit tellement pour la chicane qu'il n'est pas capable de comprendre qu'on peut s'entendre entre partis, qu'on peut s'entendre et que c'est bon pour les Québécois, que c'est bon pour les Canadiens, que c'est bon pour la lutte contre les changements climatiques, que c'est bon pour la réconciliation, que c'est bon pour le travailleur, que c'est bon pour les familles, Monsieur le Président, parce que c'est bon, c'est mauvais pour le Bloc, puis ça, il n'aime pas ça.
L'honorable député de Jonquière.
Ah, la fameuse rhétorique de la chicane. Mais dans les faits, ce que les Québécois demandent, c'est des transferts en santé. Et là, on a une alliance néolibérale qui, elle, propose des conditions. Hein? Comme si Ottawa savait comment gérer les hôpitaux, comment fonctionne le réseau de la santé du Québec et des provinces. Tout le monde a vu comment vous êtes pioui dans vos propres champs de compétences. Et là, vous allez dire, et vous allez prétendre connaître mieux que tout le monde les besoins en santé, en logement et en petite enfance. Au lieu de perdre votre temps, pourquoi l'Alliance néolibérale n'écoute-t-elle pas le Québec et les provinces dont c'est la compétence? C'est la compétence du Québec. Et n'augmente-t-elle pas les transferts de 35 % en santé, et ça, sans condition?
L'honorable ministre.
Monsieur le Président, on écoute les provinces, on écoute le Québec. Ceux qu'on n'écoute pas, c'est le Bloc, M. le Président, parce qu'ils cherchent les chicanes tout le temps. Le Bloc, il veut des chicanes de juridiction. Mais une chicane de juridiction, ça ne crée pas une seule job, M. le Président. Une chicane de juridiction, ça ne donne pas un médecin de plus ou une infirmière de plus, M. le Président. Des chicanes de juridiction, là, c'est juste bon pour le Bloc, mais pas pour les Québécois, pour personne d'autre, M. le Président. Nous, on va libérer pour le Québec et pour l'ensemble des Canadiens.
L'honorable député de Montcalm.
Quand on n'a pas d'argument, M. le Président, on parle de chicane. Assurance médicaments, soins à domicile, soins de longue durée, embauche de médecins et d'infirmières. Rien de tout ça ne relève du fédéral. Il faut le voir. L'entente néolibérale ne vise pas qu'à renforcer le gouvernement minoritaire. Bien davantage, elle vise à affaiblir les pouvoirs et les choix du Québec et des provinces, à moins qu'il y ait un droit de retrait. Alors, dans tout ce qui a été annoncé aujourd'hui, le gouvernement et ses petits amis s'engagent-ils à donner un droit de retrait avec pleine compensation, sans condition, au Québec et aux provinces?
L'honorable ministre.
Monsieur le Président, depuis l'arrivée de notre gouvernement au pouvoir, nous avons collaboré avec les provinces sur les questions aussi importantes que les soins de santé. Comment protéger les Canadiens pendant une période de pandémie? Comment bâtir et continuer d'investir dans un système de soins de santé publique qui fait l'envie du monde? Et c'est exactement les conversations constructives que nous avons avec toutes les provinces, y compris le gouvernement du Québec. Et nous avons hâte de continuer ces conversations, Monsieur le Président.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, the government is set to increase fuel prices on April the 1st. This will drive inflation on already soaring food prices. And it's not only Canadian lives that Liberals are making harder. International students are already suffering due to the racism in IRCC and this Liberal-made immigration backlog. In the Metro Vancouver area, almost 70% of food bank users at the DOMINIC food bank are international students. Now, why is this NDP Liberal government so good and making so many people miserable?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives would like to have Canadians think that a temporary pause on taxes would actually benefit Canadians at the pumps. We know that that is simply not the case. We know that the oil companies would not pass those savings on to Canadians. On this side of the House, we're focused on real, long-term plans to address affordability, not cheap political gas gimmicks.
The honourable member for Balfour's Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, clearly this government doesn't care if it makes lives miserable for Canadians. The pocketbooks of Canadians cannot keep up with skyrocketing costs. Just last week, we know that the Bank of Canada revealed that the carbon tax alone increased inflation by 0.4%, confirming that this Liberal policy is hurting Canadians. It's a failed policy that is even more costly for those living in rural communities, and it is set to increase. Mr. Speaker, if the NDP Liberal government won't abandon the carbon tax, will they at least provide Canadians some immediate relief with a GST holiday on gasoline and diesel?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, our plan is designed so that the majority of households receives more in climate action incentive payments than they pay. This has been confirmed by the independent analysis of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. As the carbon tax increases, these payments also increase, leaving the majority of Canadians with more money in their pockets. In Ontario, a household will receive $600 this year, Mr. Speaker, $720 in Manitoba, $1,000 in Saskatchewan, and $980 in Alberta. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hold on. I'm just waiting for a sec here. Hold on. There we go. The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister, who did not know the price of backshop bacon, is probably surprised to hear inflation is at 5.7% and rising. His carbon tax has generated surplus revenue, taking money out of the pockets of average Canadians. When will the NDP Liberal government give some of that back to the Canadian who work hard and pay it?
The Honourable Minister.
Let me talk about some facts about affordability that this side of the aisle is putting into place. Fact, a single mom with 2 kids will receive $13,600 from the Canada Child Benefit. Fact, the average family in Saskatchewan will get almost $1,000 in their carbon price rebate. Fact, seniors received an extra $500 this summer. Fact, a student will save $3,000 through our change to student loans. Real facts on affordability, not political gimmicks.
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Hey. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Governor of the Bank of Canada revealed that the carbon tax contributed to inflation by nearly 0.5%. While the Liberals claim that this isn't their fault and that it is a global phenomenon, those who think and understand monetary policy know otherwise. This is costing Canadians who I hear from who are paying more for their home heating and more at the pumps. So my question is this: will the NDP Liberal government commit today to scrapping their carbon tax increase to come into effect on April 1st?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know that a price on pollution is the best way to fight climate change, and that inflation is a global phenomenon. The data the member opposite is citing is from the Governor does not factor in the rebates that are putting more money in the pockets of Canadians now with quarterly payments. And while it's not surprising to see Conservatives campaigning for less climate action against the climate action incentive, which put more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadian families, it's still disappointing. While they decide on climate change, we're going to fight climate change.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
This government said supporting women fleeing violence is their top priority. Gender-based violence has been rising at an alarming rate, and in my city of London, it has increased by 53%. But organizations like Inova in London that support women are being told that they will not get the necessary funding to run their life-saving programs. Without action, women in Canada will continue to experience devastating violence. In the upcoming budget, this government must provide core, stable funding. When will the Liberals keep their promise and stand up for women?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the Honourable Member's question and would like to let her know that we on this side of the House have been standing up for women. When COVID-19 hit, we were there. $100 million, Mr. Speaker, in shelter funding that helped 1,200 organizations. We knew when the pandemic hit that home wasn't safe for everyone, and we made sure that we provided the funding to help women and will continue to do so.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, 34% of people who menstruate had to sacrifice other needs to afford menstrual hygiene products. It costs an individual an average of $6,000 over a lifetime for these products. Menstrual hygiene products are essential health necessities, not luxuries, yet this government makes us beg for a pad. When will the Liberal government acknowledge the reality of period poverty in this country and ensure equitable access to free menstrual hygiene products for all?
Here, here. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you so much, the Honourable Member, for her question and for her advocacy. It's good to work with her. I will say this, we are working, my team and I, on that. It is part of my mandate letter. We take it very, very seriously. We are also consulting with organizations on the ground, Mr. Speaker, that will inform us on the path ahead.
The Honourable Member for Mississauga, Erin Mills.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday was the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. This day reminds us that while progress is being made to fight systemic racism, hate, and injustice, there's much more work to do. And that work is really important because uplifting vulnerable communities improves the health and prosperity of all Canadians, including our economy. Can the Minister of Housing and Diversity and Inclusion please tell us what our government is doing to combat racism so that communities like mine in Mississauga, Erin Mills, can continue to flourish and prosper?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for her question on her important advocacy on an important matter. Our government has taken the issue of tackling racism as a top priority. That is why we've invested over $100 million in the anti-racism strategy, including investing $70 million in community organizations fighting racism on the ground. But we know that there's more work to be done. That is why we're committed to fighting systemic racism in our institutions. We're committed to renewing our anti-racism strategy and supporting racialized Canadians every step of the way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles.
Monsieur le Président, hier, j'ai demandé une question à la ministre des Affaires étrangères. Pour lui me répondre, c'est le secrétaire parlementaire à la Défense qui a lu une feuille qui n'avait rien à voir avec ma question. Donc, je vais leur demander aujourd'hui parce que c'est une question importante. Les libéraux ont finalement compris qu'il était très important d'envoyer des armes létales en Ukraine. Et la ministre des Affaires étrangères a répondu en entrevue télévision hier que les armes étaient toutes rendues sur le territoire ukrainien. Donc, ma question est simple. Est-ce que les armes envoyées par le Canada sont toutes rendues sur la champ de bataille en Ukraine? Oui ou non?
L'honorable ministre.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bien entendu, je travaille avec ma collègue ministre de la Défense sur cette question. Nous sommes coordonnés et il va de soi que l'Ukraine doit être en mesure de bien se défendre face à l'agresseur russe. Bien entendu, les collègues le savent, nous fournissons de l'équipement et des armes à l'Ukraine. C'est important pour que les gens puissent se défendre sur le terrain, mais également c'est important au niveau diplomatique parce qu'au même moment, ils sont en mesure d'être en position de force au niveau de la table de négociation. Merci.
Donc, merci. On voit que la réponse à Mario Dumont hier était fausse parce que vous n'avez pas répondu à la question clairement. Nos armes ne sont pas rendues en Ukraine. Et là, ça démontre comme la semaine passée, le voyage premier ministre avec des ministres en Europe qui ont fait le tour un peu partout. On ne sait pas pourquoi, à part que pour faire des photos inutiles. Ce soir, le premier ministre s'en va à une réunion du G7. Est-ce qu'il va emmener le chef du NPD avec lui pour s'assurer que le chef du NPD dise moins d'implication militaire en Ukraine?
L'honorable ministre.
Premièrement, mon collègue devrait être rassuré, les Ukrainiens sont soutenus par le Canada. Je sais que c'était une demande de mon collègue, je sais que c'était une demande de son parti, et toute la Chambre des communes est unie sur cette question. Donc, premier point. Deuxième point, les Canadiens s'attendent, bien entendu, à ce que l'aide létale et non létale se rendent en Ukraine. Mais les Canadiens savent également, et nos alliés savent également, qu'il est important de ne pas dévoiler les détails sur cette question-là, parce qu'il s'agit d'une question de sécurité. Alors, ça me fait plaisir de travailler avec mon collègue sur cette question-là, mais il peut être assuré qu'à chaque fois que nous faisons des déclarations en tant que gouvernement, elles sont véridiques. Merci.
The honourable member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Mr. Speaker, I and many other combat veterans were disappointed to hear the Minister of Foreign Affairs state Canada, quote, is not a military power, unquote. I have led some of Canada's finest warriors in Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. I'd like to educate the minister that Canadian success in, quote, making sure that diplomacy is happening, unquote, during global conflicts is predicated by our ability to back it up militarily. Mr. Speaker, I'm doubtful the minister will apologize, but will she acknowledge the Canadian Armed Forces personnel are amongst the best in the world and that Canada is a military power?
The Honourable Minister.
Obviously, we support our men and women in uniform. That's exactly why I had the chance to go to Ukraine to meet with them through Operation Unifier and as well as in Latvia. At the same time, I find it a bit rich coming from the Conservatives as they reduce their military spending below 1% of
Order. 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 The Honourable Minister.
Of course, as I mentioned, I find it a bit rich on the part of the Conservative as they reduce their military spending. We're in government below 1%, which was the lowest in 60 years. Exactly. Of course, it will be a pleasure to work with my colleague because the question of Ukraine is not a partisan question. It is a question that should unite ourselves while people are...
The Honourable Member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Mr. Speaker, Ukrainians are fighting for their freedom, democracy, and even their lives. They've asked for more help from Canada. The Canadian Armed Forces is in the process of divesting many armoured vehicle fleets like the Coyote, M113, and Bison armoured vehicles as they are replaced by the Armoured Combat Support Vehicle Project. Could these vehicles be donated to Ukraine? And if so, when?
Good question. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for the question and the Canadian Armed Forces for their ongoing and historic work to protect our country and contribute to our world. I would like to say, in addition to that we have contributed lethal and non-lethal aid to Ukraine, anti-tank missiles, grenades, including fragmentation vests, and we will continue to provide millions and millions worth of aid to Ukraine. In terms of the suggestion going forward, I look forward to working with my honourable colleague to get more details on his suggestions so that we can take it forward. We will continue to leave no stone unturned to assist Ukraine. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Lac-Saint-Jean.
Monsieur le Président, le Bloc québécois appuie certaines des démarches du gouvernement pour faciliter l'accueil de réfugiés de la guerre d'Ukraine. Mais une fois que le ministre a invité toutes ces familles-là, il n'a pas le droit de les laisser souffrir dans des camps de réfugiés pendant des semaines, voire des mois. C'est profondément traumatisant ce que vivent ces familles-là. Elles ont besoin d'être rassurées. Elles ont besoin d'entendre le gouvernement du Canada leur dire que des avions s'en viennent les chercher. Et elles ont besoin de savoir quand. Donc, quand est-ce que le ministre va analyser des vols et créer une passerelle aérienne?
The Honourable Minister.
Je remercie les députés de cette question et en particulier de son esprit de collaboration sur le dossier de l'Ukraine. C'est possible pour tous les partis de collaborer avec notre gouvernement. Nous traitons en priorité les demandes ukrainiennes. Depuis janvier, Monsieur le Président, plus de 10 000 Ukrainiens sont arrivés au Canada. La semaine dernière, j'ai annoncé de nouvelles mesures qui permettront aux Ukrainiens de venir au Canada plus facilement et plus rapidement, et c'est en toute sécurité. Je vais continuer mon travail avec mes collègues pour faciliter l'arrivée de plus grand nombre possible d'Ukrainiens au Canada.
Honorable député de Lac-Saint-Jean.
Monsieur le Président, le ministre sait qu'il peut compter sur notre collaboration, mais là, il faut que ça bouge. Les gens ne comprennent pas comment ça se fait qu'encore aujourd'hui, il n'y a pas d'opération aérienne avec des vols analysés pour ramener les réfugiés chez nous. Même Air Transat a levé la main pour dire qu'ils veulent participer à ces gouvernements, et là, je les cite, souhaitent organiser une opération de ce type. Alors, si même les compagnies aériennes sont volontaires, rendu là, est-ce que le ministre peut annoncer aujourd'hui que cette opération-là aura bel et bien lieu?
The Honourable Minister.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Nous travaillons avec nos partenaires, y compris les provinces et les territoires, les milieux des affaires, la communauté canado-ukrainienne et les organismes d'établissement sur la meilleure façon de soutenir les personnes qui arrivent d'Ukraine. Je vois des conversations sur cet enjeu avec le secteur privé. Juste avant une période de questions avec la commissaire européenne, je vais continuer mon travail sur faciliter l'arrivée de plus grand nombre d'Ukrainiens au Canada sur le programme spécial. It's an emergency, Mr. Speaker. We're treating it as such, and we're going to continue to work to welcome as many people here as quickly as possible, as safely as possible.
Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Yesterday, the Health Minister told committee that the government had a plan for every possible policy related to their continued mandates, but he repeatedly refused to share the government's plan to end the mandates, and I want to give him another chance right now. The provinces have shown leadership and are all moving on from COVID mandates. Will the minister tell Canadians on which date the Liberal-NDP government will end the COVID mandates?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his collaboration on the Health Committee. Today we know more about COVID-19 than ever before, and we're in a very different place than when we were in March 2020. We have safe, effective vaccines and highly vaccinated population, as well as testing, surveillance tools, and new ways to identify variants of concern and track the spread of the virus. But the future remains certain, and COVID-19 is not over. There are many, many factors at play, and our government is committed to following the science going forward to get out of this pandemic for good.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
And if the parliamentary secretary says the government is going to follow the science, then he should do that, just like the 10 chief medical officers of health have done in every single province in this country. They're all ending the mandate. So we want to know what the benchmarks are. What are the data points that this government is going to use to end the mandate? So they don't need to end the mandates today if they have a plan. But the problem is they don't have a plan. They're putting politics first. They're dividing Canadians, dividing communities. So when will they put politics aside and the division decision, look to the science, follow the leadership of the provinces, their chief medical officers of health, and end the federal mandates.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank my colleague across the way for acknowledging that my answer was both thorough and good. I also want to acknowledge that he asked some pretty good questions yesterday on committee, and I thought the answers that the minister gave him were excellent. This is a very complex issue. This is a very, very complex issue. And our government is going to keep making decisions based on the best science, and we also understand that there are two jurisdictions. There are provincial jurisdictions and there are federal ones. The provinces will make decisions accordingly with their health officials, and we will make our decisions based on the science, the exact same science, with our health officials. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
Well, they might be based on political science, but certainly not medical science. Yesterday, when the health minister was asked to explain when federal mandates would be taken off, he shrugged his shoulders and he said, well, COVID is still here. No benchmarks have been set, no plan has been put in place, and no assurances have been given as to when we return to normal. This is absolutely irresponsible of the government. Provinces can do it, other countries can do it, why can't Canada do it? So when will the Prime Minister follow the science, the real science, lift the mandates, and give Canadians their freedom back?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to address the question from my colleague and the entire Conservative caucus that is unmasked today and is pretending that COVID-19 is completely over. I'm sorry, we can't wish the pandemic is over. We have to follow the science, and our government is committed to following that science.
I'm waiting for a certain level. I'm just waiting for a certain level, and then we'll keep going. There, the Parliamentary Secretary.
Put your mask on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will put my mask on as soon as I sit back down, like the rest of my colleagues who are committed to following the science. This pandemic is not over. Canadians...
Can we just wait until after question period is done? We can go out and run around or do something. All right. I am going to give the member an opportunity to respond. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I want this pandemic to be over as soon as possible, just like every other member of this House. I've continued to follow the science, my colleagues have continued to follow the science, and we will ensure that we get through this pandemic. But the thing that I can't get over is the fact that Canadians are in the hospital right now. Over 5,000 Canadians are in the hospital right now with COVID-19, and you don't seem to care. Our colleagues across don't seem to care.
Oh, we're not done yet. We've got about 10 questions left, so. All right, we ready? All right. The Honourable Member, l'Honourable Député de Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Vendredi dernier, le gouvernement du Québec, la Ville de Montréal ainsi que le gouvernement du Canada ont annoncé la nouvelle mouture et les reconfigurations du projet de prolongement de la ligne bleue du métro de Montréal. Ce projet est grandement attendu par la communauté métropolitaine depuis plusieurs décennies. L'honorable ministre du Patrimoine canadien et lieutenant du Québec peut-il expliquer à la Chambre comment le gouvernement fédéral soutient concrètement les Québécois dans cette initiative?
L'honorable ministre du Patrimoine canadien.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie ma collègue pour son excellente question. C'était vraiment solide, Monsieur le Président. Alors, on a investi 1,3 milliard de dollars pour contribuer au prolongement de la ligne bleue. C'est un projet qui est important pour elle. Ça passe à Saint-Léonard. Pour moi, ça s'en vient en Anjou. Ça fait longtemps qu'on entend ça, Monsieur le Président. Alors, c'est plus de 25 000 Québécois qui vont avoir accès à du transport en commun qui est fiable, qui est efficace. Et ça, Monsieur le Président, c'est en plus de 750 millions de dollars qu'on a annoncé pour les réseaux de transport en commun partout au pays. Alors, Monsieur le Président, le transport collectif, c'est une priorité pour notre gouvernement et on va continuer à le soutenir.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Canada is a signatory to the conventions of the International Labour Organization, which prohibit international commerce in prison-made goods unless the prisoners are paid market wages. This leaves me wondering how Corrections Canada justifies its plan to open a factory farm at Joyceville Penitentiary where prisoners would milk 2,200 goats to produce infant formula for export to China while being paid only a fraction of the minimum wage. Doesn't this plan violate our international commitments?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The prison farm at Collins Bay, I know what a tremendous organization is happening there. I will check into that matter for the Honourable Member and I will respond back to him.
The Honourable Member for Moose Jaw, Lake Centre and Lanigan.
Mr. Speaker, farmers are paying record amounts to dry grain. Families are paying record amounts to fill their vehicles to get their kids to school and get groceries. The price of gas in my riding is at over $1.78. On April 1st, this coalition is once again raising the carbon tax. People in my riding don't find this April Fool's prank funny. Policy should be there to help us, not punish us. Saskatchewan families need help with the rising cost of living, not another tax hike. When will this NDP Liberal government cancel this tax grab?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know that carbon price is one of the most effective measures to reduce emissions, and if they won't believe the Parliamentary Budget Officer, if they won't believe the IMF, maybe they will believe the member from New Brunswick Southwest, who said that his province should go back to using the federal carbon pricing system because at least it comes with rebate, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Coast of Bays, Central, Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians and industry stakeholders have waited a long time in anxious anticipation for a decision on the Beta Nord energy project. Now with the NDP Liberal marriage, they're more uneasy than ever. Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister promised concessions such as cancelling energy projects like Beta Nord, in return for the NDP hand in marriage.
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, our government recognizes the importance of the decision on Equinor's project Beigeonal development. As the member opposite knows, it requires that we review the extensive information prior to deciding whether the Beigeonal project is...
Order. Are we ready? Honestly, we can be here till 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and then we're done. And then, you know. So, there was a question. I want to hear the answer. Let's see if the minister can provide us with that answer. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, as I was saying, we need to look at extensive information prior to deciding whether the Beigeonal project is likely to cause negative environmental effects. This is why we extended the legislated timeline for the project to provide with more time to review the considerable amount of complex information and make an informed decision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings Hants.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know how important rail service is to be able to move essential goods across the country, whether or not it's inputs for farmers and ranchers or being able to actually take the bountiful harvest of those ranchers and producers and get it to export market. We watched with concern with the ongoing situation with CP Rail and the union in terms of what a disruption could mean to Canadians. That's right. I had the conversation to speak with the Minister of Labour directly in the last few days. I know he was on the ground in Calgary. We were working with federal mediators to be able to find a solution, and thankfully that came this morning. Can this minister provide us an update on when services will resume and the work that was undertaken to get to this critical juncture? Thank you.
Honourable Minister of Labour.
Mr. Speaker, we have always respected the collective bargaining process because the best, most durable deals are made at the table. It is the best path to achieve fairness and stability in the economy. I want to congratulate and thank CV Rail and Teamsters. They stayed at the table and they put in the hard work to come to a resolution. Normal business operations will resume today and they will continue during the arbitration period. And I especially want to thank the good people at the Federal Mediation Service who worked so closely with the parties and supported them throughout these negotiations. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, the Arctic poles are experiencing unprecedented heat waves, causing alarm among climate scientists. This is another dire warning that we are in a climate emergency. Yet the Liberals keep fueling the climate crisis, handing out billions to big oil and gas. The same companies that are making record profits as they gouge Canadians at the pump. How many more dire warnings does this government need before they stop paying big oil to pollute? When will this Prime Minister stop putting corporate profits before people and the planet?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for Victoria for her question. As we have committed to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies 2 years earlier than our G20 country partners, Mr. Speaker, we will do this, and I will be happy to work with her to make that happen as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Government is failing to help tourism businesses hardest hit by the pandemic. The Tourism and Hospitality Recovery Program was supposed to help, but due to an inflexible application process, many seasonal businesses can't access it. The Liberals cut its funding last week, and the program will end in May, just when it's needed most. Will the government commit to continued full funding for the program, change the application requirements so seasonal operators are not excluded, and extend the program until September?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Critic for his question, and as the Honourable Critic knows, we invested $15 billion in the tourism and hardest hit sector. In December, we passed C2, which put $12 billion of additional money into the tourism and hardest hit sector. Mr. Speaker, that includes $500 million for the Tourism Relief Fund, announcements that are happening from coast to coast to coast in all kinds of ridings. My number one message to all of the tourism operators and all of the businesses is thank you. You are there with the borders open. Brighter days are ahead. We supported you during COVID. We'll support you now as well.
Well, that's all the time we have for question period.